There is a moment in Christian caregiving when the family agrees to try one more thing: another medication adjustment, another specialist, another strategy, and everyone feels relieved because action feels faithful. But sometimes beneath that decision is a question nobody wants to say out loud. And that is, what if this doesn't work? Not emotionally, but structurally. Most families never define the boundary before they move forward. They just hope that the next step will buy enough time. Hey, Christian Care Companion. Welcome back to Dementia Caregiver Support for Christians, the podcast for Bible-believing Christians trying to solve the right thing in the wrong order. If you are in a season where your family keeps trying the next thing, but doesn't define what happens if it should fail, this episode will give you clarity. And if you need help applying this to your own specific situation, you can book a caregiving threshold review at thinkdifferentdementia.com. Today, we are going to talk about why defining the boundary before things escalate is not fear, it is stewardship. Recently, I was on a family call with a blended family, and everyone in the room had agreed that things were escalating. The wife, the mom, was misidentifying her husband. She is blocking him in the house from cooking, managing the medication, going into rooms, taking items out of his hands. Some physical pushing and shoving has started, and there is a definitive cycle of rage, sweetness, and then no memory of what had occurred. And these episodes were happening multiple times every single day. During the family meeting, everyone agreed something has changed, but nobody has defined what that change actually means structurally in the family. The conversation quickly moved to adjusting her medication, trying different specialists, discussions related to which provider may be the best for her in this specific situation, and how quickly can we get her in to see the medical specialists. And that is very common, and there is nothing wrong with starting with medication adjustments. It is definitely appropriate to start addressing and looking and seeing if medication can be the solution. However, the problem comes in when trying the next thing feels responsible and delays the decision. As a Christian caregiver, you and I want to be faithful. We want to know that we have tried everything. We have exhausted every reasonable option and solution. We don't want to change things prematurely. We want to allow this person that we love to remain at home. And we want to, when we're adult children, honor our parents. Now, in this specific situation, it is a blended family. So we have his and we have hers. And there are competing interests, even though they have been married for 25 years. And it is reasonable that each of the respective parents, children are concerned for their biological parent, not saying that they don't love the person their parent married. However, in a Christian family, often we want to then honor and preserve this marriage, which is good and right. I'm not disputing that at all. And we want to preserve the home, keeping this wife at home. None of that is wrong. None of that is a weakness. It's a good thing to want to help keep somebody at home if at all possible. And obviously, I'm a believer. The marriage does come first. However, not at all costs. Trying to keep somebody at home and being faithful requires us to have wisdom and steward this process better or well. Colossians 3 verse 23 says, "Whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men." Often, this is how caregivers approach their decisions. But stewardship is not the same thing as indefinite delay. The second thing that I think we sometimes miss is a missing questions. Oftentimes, we try the medical model first. And as I said, I am not opposed to the medical model. I believe that medication does play a significant role in helping somebody when they are experiencing real, actual changes to their brain. I do not believe that it is the solution to a dementia caregiving journey. It is a part of the solution, but it is not the solution. And it is okay to say, let us try the medication first to see if we can keep her at home. Absolutely 100% appropriate. The challenge is we don't stop then and say these things. What if the aggression continues for 6-8 weeks from now after the medication has had a reasonable opportunity to be effective? Or what do we do if dad's health continues to decline? What then? What's the next thing? What do we do if his physical safety is threatened? Or what do we do if she refuses to take the medication that is designed to help her stay at home? What do we do then? All of those things are a structural gap. When we try something new without defining our timeline, how long we are going to give the solution to see if it works. If we don't define a measurable outcome, what does it mean that it's actually continuing to be a safe environment for both of them, for both the caregiver and the care receiver? When we don't define the safety boundary, what is the safety boundary? It doesn't matter that she is significantly smaller than him. What do we do if she keeps being physically aggressive and his safety comes into the mix? Or what do we do if things keep escalating? And what is the trigger that defines that this isn't a solution anymore? All of this creates a decision lag that can result in harm to both the caregiver and the care receiver, as well as the family unit around them. Because caregiving is not in isolation, it is in a family unit. There are people around the two people who are primarily involved, but there are other people around. In this specific case, we have adult children and grandchildren who are around and both sides are concerned. In this specific case, medication is not the real decision that we need to be making. We need to absolutely give the medication an opportunity to be successful. And it may be 100% appropriate. But in this specific scenario, the medication is functioning as a time-buying strategy, an attempt to stabilize a very unstable situation, and possibly a delay mechanism. And it is not wrong to delay. It is only wrong to delay when we do not define the limits that this delay. It is only wrong if we do not define the limits that this delay is actually creating, and then it becomes drift. Proverbs 27 verse 12 says, "The prudent sees danger and hides himself, but the simple go on and suffer for it." Prudence is another word for wisdom. Prudence requires us naming a danger before it explodes, not after it actually explodes. So what is the real threshold? In this specific meeting with these specific kids and the husband, the real threshold was not the medication. The real threshold, or the elephant in the room, is that physical aggression has started to happen. There is tremendous misidentification from her related to items and people and home and phones and shoes and all of the physical things in her environment. Her home is not neutral emotionally anymore. It is both her prison as well as her castle. And the caregiver's health, dad's health, is declining. There is evidence of it. And because her home is her castle, trying to bring in new help into the house is not an option. It is not a solution in this specific situation. What this has resulted in is a structural shift. When the home has become both the safe place as well as the most volatile place, we are not just looking at early stage management. You are at a capacity threshold that will fall apart if it's not addressed sooner rather than later, or in the crisis. Those are the only two outcomes. We either address the structural shift, and we control the timeline, or we don't address the structural shift, and we will in the crisis. Christian families frequently will avoid pre-deciding failure. We avoid saying, if this fails, we will consider assisted living. Because to us, it feels like we are betraying our parent. And defining a boundary is not a betrayal. It is wisdom. Luke 14 verse 28 says, "For which of you, desiring to build a tower, does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it?" Counting the cost also includes counting the cost of waiting. Waiting is an option. However, waiting without recognizing that waiting has a cost is not an option. Waiting involves risk. And as long as you can say that you have considered the risk of waiting, it's okay to wait. It's just not okay not to wait, or it's just not okay to continue waiting and not to express this risk and this cost to yourself. So what do healthy boundaries look like? Instead of just saying, let's try medication, it becomes defined. It becomes, we will try medication for X amount of time, 4 to 6 weeks, 8 to 12 weeks, whatever the defined timeline is, to see whether the medication can stabilize the situation. We will define what improvement in this specific situation means. Does that mean less calling of family to de-escalate the situation? Does it mean less outbursts of anger and frustration? Does it mean we are going to be ensuring that dad gets an opportunity and defined times to get away and bring in familiar family caregivers to give him a break? If aggression escalates, or if things remain unchanged, when will we actually then reconvene? When will we sit down again and have a conversation about whether or not things can stay the same? If there is physical harm of any sort, do we escalate it immediately? Yes, 100%. This is not to be panicky. This is to define a boundary in our family before we cross it. Stewardship includes limits. The Lord gives each one of us different talents. Each one of us has differing amounts of energy, differing amounts of money, differing amounts of everything: time, effort, energy. Christian caregiving does not include throwing yourself under the bus and martyrdom. We are not required to do this from a spirit of martyrdom. We are required to do this from a spirit of stewardship. And we are not infallible. We have limits. Absolutely 100%. It is not just unlimited exposure to harm. Christian stewardship is not just silent endurance to escalating danger. Christian stewardship is ordered love. 1 Corinthians 14 verse 40 says, "But all things should be done decently and in order." Order includes safety of all humans involved, safety of the person living with dementia, safety of the people around the person living with dementia. Order includes clarity. Order includes thresholds. So, if you find yourself endlessly trying the next intervention, frantically researching every single day, constantly calling the next specialist, frequently just trying to adjust and tweak the medication to buy a little more time, but never, ever, ever defining what will happen if all of these things fail, you are at a structural threshold. And that is exactly where clarity matters most. The next intervention isn't the problem. The undefined limits are. When families refuse to name what happens if the plan fails, the delay becomes drift. And drift eventually will become a crisis. Faithfulness does not require you to try everything forever. It requires you to define when enough is enough. And if you have recognized your own family in this episode, you're not alone and you are not stuck. You are at a threshold. And thresholds require clarity, not just optimism and muscling through. If you need help defining that boundary before something forces your hand, schedule a caregiving threshold review at thinkdifferentdementia.com and go to the link in the show notes. Not to fix everything, but to decide what happens next on purpose.